Hello, dear viewers of my video. I hope you enjoy watching it and look forward to your feedback in the comments. They say confidence is silent, but I've learned silence gets you erased. I wore red that morning. Not for seduction, though that's what they'd say later, behind their smug coffee cups and shoulder shrugs, but because I wanted to feel like someone who couldn't be ignored. Red is visible, and after 8 years of invisibility, I needed that. I'm Maddie. Madeline Hart, technically. 35, no husband, no kids, no Instagram-worthy kitchen. Just a small apartment that smells like ink toner and lemon polish because I stay too late in offices and forget to take my leftovers out of the fridge. But I'm good at what I do. I've been working at Vancorp Capital for 8 years, and I know how to prepare acquisition contracts that make lawyers nod in approval and CFOs sigh in relief. I don't just format documents, I understand them, sometimes more than the executives who sign them. That's how I ended up in the 15th floor boardroom on a sticky August afternoon, a full folder in my lap, listening to our CEO Nathan Maddox wax poetic about the company we were about to acquire for $58 million. Final phase, he said, grinning at the other suits in the room. Once this is signed, Vancorp becomes the third largest procurement network in the Western Corridor. Let's toast to that. Glasses clinked. People smiled. I sat near the end of the table, as usual, quiet, invisible in plain sight. That would have been fine. It always had been. But then I saw it. Page 67, Clause 4.9b of the purchase agreement. It looked like nothing. A minor clause in a sea of corporate language. But my brain doesn't forget. I'd read something just like it 4 years ago during a failed merger. A clause that left a transfer loophole wide open. I cleared my throat, soft at first. No one noticed. Then louder. Sorry, I think there's an issue on page 67, in clause 4.9b. The air in the room shifted. You know that way it does when someone low-level speaks out of turn. Nathan's head turned slowly toward me, smile fading. What kind of issue? He asked, one eyebrow raised like a warning sign. I hesitated. My fingers tapped the manila folder in my lap. It's a survivorship clause. It assigns all purchase-related assets to the buyer retroactively, but doesn't clearly define third-party intellectual property assignments, which means, technically, certain rights can be reallocated without re-signature, including... Stop! Nathan lifted a hand, then laughed. Actually laughed. Madeline, he said, as if saying my name in full would remind me of my place. You're just a secretary, not a lawyer. Leave the legal concerns to people who pass the bar. My face went hot. Not with shame, with something deeper, like betrayal that had finally rotted into clarity. The others chuckled. Even Dan from legal, who knew I was right. He didn't meet my eyes. I'm just trying to protect the company, I said, voice calm but cold. Nathan leaned back in his chair, sipping his imported mineral water. You're trying to look smart in a room where you don't belong. Know your role, Maddie. It's to type, not think. The meeting moved on without me. The signatures were prepared. I sat there while they handed out pens like victory medals, each one believing they were part of some historic moment. But here's what they didn't know. That clause, that loophole, it was exploitable. And I'd just been publicly told not to touch it. So I didn't. I used it. 3 hours after that meeting, I contacted a friend from grad school, Jenna, now working in private IP law. I showed her the clause, the contract, and the execution timeline. She stared at her screen for a full minute, then looked up and said, If you wanted to claim survivorship rights in this context, the law technically allows it, for a limited window, if you act fast. So I acted. I used a dormant LLC I owned for freelance work, M&H Strategy. Maddox never paid attention to side entities, and neither did legal. I filed a notice of claim to the rights covered under Clause 4.9b. I sent it to the registry, paid $1 for the provisional asset rights using the same clause they refused to edit. And that was it. I owned part of the acquisition. Not on paper, they read, But in the filing, they ignored. The next morning, when Nathan strutted into the building preparing to announce the closing of the $58 million deal, something happened. He was stopped by compliance. And that's where the chaos began. By 6:15 p.m., the office was almost empty. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, soft and sharp, like a static hum that only seems loud when you're alone. Most of the team had gone home celebrating. The deal was virtually done, according to Nathan. Champagne had been popped in the executive lounge. I'd been invited, of course, out of politeness, but I made up an excuse about having emails to finish. No one noticed when I stayed behind. I sat at my desk, a paper cup of burnt coffee growing colder beside my elbow, the purchase contract open on the screen in front of me. I wasn't reading it for work anymore. I was reading it for me. Page 67, Clause 4.9b. I reread it, then again, more slowly this time. The phrasing was vague, intentionally vague, in fact. It allowed for third-party intellectual property and licensing rights to be claimed in the absence of contradictory documentation. It was a placeholder clause, likely inserted early in negotiations and never revised. Probably a copy-paste from an older contract. I'd seen this kind of sloppiness before. But this wasn't just any deal. This was the deal. The one the entire firm had been working toward for months. The one Nathan wanted to be remembered for. I leaned back, fingers steepled, eyes still locked on the screen. The language in that clause made it possible, no, probable, that someone with the right application, filed at the right time, could claim provisional rights over the AI software component embedded in the acquisition. A sleeping clause, a blind spot, and I was the only one who'd seen it. My heart beat fast, but not out of fear, out of focus. This was no longer about pride or vindication. This was about something bigger. If the company could overlook something this dangerous, what else were they neglecting? I opened another window on my computer and began drafting the application. I'd kept my old business entity, M&H Strategy, open for tax reasons. A legal shell, nothing more. But under its name, I could file the paperwork. I just needed two things, a notary and one symbolic payment. $1. At 9:12 p.m., I printed the necessary forms. I checked them twice, signed in blue ink. My name looked sharper somehow, more certain. I slipped everything into a manila envelope and held it for a long moment before slipping it into my bag. It was already done, in essence. The rest was just mechanics. The next morning, the city moved like it always did, impatiently. Horns honked. Suits rushed down sidewalks with phones glued to their ears. No one knew what I was about to do. It felt surreal, walking through it all so calmly while carrying something that could tilt the balance of everything happening inside our firm. At 10:45 a.m., I arrived at the notary's office, tucked inside a narrow brick building 3 blocks from the courthouse. The receptionist barely looked up when I signed in. When they called my name, I walked into the room with the envelope clutched tightly under my arm. A woman with square glasses and a tired smile asked for my ID, read through the document slowly, and then finally said, "All in order." She slid a small metal tray across the desk. "For the filing fee." I pulled a crisp dollar bill from my wallet. I'd chosen it carefully that morning, straight from an ATM, no creases. I placed it in the tray. The woman looked at it for a second longer than necessary. Maybe she knew. Maybe she didn't. But she nodded and reached for her stamp. One loud, satisfying thump of ink against paper. It was done. Back at the office, nothing had changed. Nathan was laughing in the hallway. Marissa from PR was holding fabric samples for the IPO announcement gala. Everyone carried on, assuming the ship was steady, heading straight toward glory. I sat at my desk and opened my inbox. Dozens of emails. A calendar full of meetings. Deadlines, revisions, reminders. All of it like static noise in the background. But I knew something now that no one else did. I had filed the claim. I had paid the dollar, and without that license, without my license, the deal couldn't legally close. They could smile, sign, celebrate, plan the press release. But somewhere in the fine print, in the quiet world of official filings and public record, I now held a key they didn't even know was missing. The floor hadn't shifted under them yet, but it would. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't need to. I just sat a little straighter. My name still wasn't on the office door, but it was somewhere far more powerful now. In the registry, on the record, in the system. Invisible, yes, but not forgotten, and certainly not powerless. 3 days passed. At first, nothing happened. No meetings were canceled. No emails flagged red. The executive floor still echoed with confident footsteps and catered lunches. But I knew what I'd done was more than just paperwork. It was a fracture. And fractures spread. Slowly at first, then all at once. The shift began on a Wednesday morning. I had just returned from the copy room, a warm stack of board meeting packets in my hands, when I heard it. Raised voices coming from behind the frosted glass wall of conference room B. 2 of the in-house attorneys, Francesca and Lionel, stood at the far end of the room, flanked by 2 outside counsel reps in tailored gray suits. Their tones were low but urgent, pacing back and forth as they passed around a slim red folder. Nathan sat at the head of the table, not speaking, just staring out the window with his jaw tight. I couldn't hear every word, but one phrase came through clear as crystal. The applicant's name isn't listed anywhere in the database. It was filed through a shell entity, M&H Strategy. We're running a trace now. I kept walking. I didn't speed up. I didn't flinch. But my pulse quickened. I reached my desk and set the packets down like it was any other day, like I hadn't just heard my entire plan make contact with reality. They knew. They didn't know it was me, not yet. But they knew someone had found the clause, that someone had stepped between them and the finish line, and that someone had followed the legal thread exactly right. The unknown applicant. That was what they were calling me. And I wasn't going to correct them. By midday, the panic had started leaking beyond legal. The executive team was swarming, not openly, but in that strange, quiet way professionals do when their titles are on the line. Whispers near the elevators, hallway conversations ending mid-sentence when someone walked by. Lionel passed my desk without looking up, though he normally greeted me by name. Francesca closed her door and didn't reopen it once all afternoon. And Nathan? He didn't speak to me. Not once. He passed by twice. The first time he was on the phone, jaw tight, eyes glassy with frustration. The second time, he paused slightly when he reached the break room, as if about to say something, then seemed to think better of it. He turned and walked away. But that hesitation, that was new. It meant something. His confidence, that air of untouchable certainty he wore like a tailored suit, had cracked. It was small, just a flinch, just a flicker, but it was there. Nathan Maddox was shaken. I stayed late that night, not because I had to, but because I needed to be alone to think. I sat at my desk as the lights dimmed on motion sensors and the rest of the office thinned out, one team at a time, until it was just the cleaning crew and me. My inbox was quiet. My hands weren't. I clicked open my private archive. Everything was there. The scanned copy of the filed license application, the time-stamped payment receipt, the notarized verification page. My name wasn't visible anywhere in the public documentation. That had been deliberate. M&H Strategy was clean, registered under a proxy in Delaware. No trails, not without a fight. But I knew Nathan. He wouldn't stop at legal work. He would dig. He would guess. He would sense. And if he suspected me, if he knew, he'd come for me. Not with confrontation, no. Not his style. He'd undermine me, isolate me, make me a problem HR would suddenly have to handle. That's how powerful men like him removed obstacles, quietly, efficiently, and I had just become his biggest one. That's when it truly hit me. This wasn't about pride anymore, not even revenge. It was about protection. Not just for me, but for what I'd discovered, what I now held. I was standing in the way of a $58 million tidal wave, and no one could afford for me to stay upright. Nathan wasn't going to fold, he was going to fight. And I needed to prepare. I started laying out my next steps that night, one by one. First, protect the documents. I moved my original files to 2 external encrypted drives, one in my apartment, one in a secure storage locker I'd rented that very afternoon. Second, notify Jenna. I sent her a short encrypted message. Phase 1 complete. Movement inside. We'll need legal firewall soon. Expect call. Third, watch everything. Every interaction. Every change. I kept a log on my home computer, separate from work systems, tracking who talked to whom, which emails were sent late at night, who was suddenly asking questions about legal filings. I knew this wasn't going to stay quiet much longer, but I wasn't afraid, not anymore. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't just the woman they looked through. I was the problem they couldn't solve. And Nathan Maddox? He had no idea how far I was willing to go. I'd been expecting it. The moment, the summons, the conversation behind closed doors where a man like Nathan Maddox would try to recenter himself as the calm one, the reasonable one, the one in control. Still, when the email popped up at 9:42 a.m., subject line, meeting request, CEO office, urgent, I felt something twist in my stomach. Not fear, not even nerves, just confirmation. It was happening. I smoothed my blouse in the hallway outside his office, not out of vanity, but to give myself exactly 5 seconds to breathe. Then I knocked. Come in, he said. His voice was flatter than usual. The room smelled faintly of eucalyptus, probably from the overpriced diffuser by the bookshelf. Nathan sat behind his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled up like he was ready to fix a problem with his own hands. He didn't offer me a seat, but I took one anyway. He didn't waste time. Let's not pretend we don't both know what's going on. I said nothing. He leaned forward. Someone, let's say someone very clever, filed a claim through a shell company for rights related to the AI component in the acquisition contract, a component we're days away from closing, that someone is threatening the integrity of a $58 million deal. His words hung in the air like smoke. Calculated. Legal adjacent. Not quite an accusation, but close enough to stain. I tilted my head. Why would someone do that, I wonder? Nathan ignored the bait. He opened the top drawer of his desk and slid a folder toward me. I didn't reach for it, but I saw the check inside. It was blank. Name your number, he said. We both know this can go away. I looked at it. Then I looked at him. You think this was about money? His jaw tightened. Everything is about money, Maddie. No, I said softly. Sometimes it's about being talked over one too many times, about being laughed at in a room full of people when you're the only one who noticed the fault line. You're not a lawyer. You're not a partner. I'm the reason the deal hasn't closed. That stopped him, for just a second, and I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Frustration, yes, but also the dawning realization that I wasn't going to fold, that maybe I'd never been what he thought I was. I warned you, I continued. In that meeting, I pointed out a vulnerability in your precious contract. You dismissed it, not just ignored, humiliated me, publicly, and now you want to pretend this is just business? Nathan's smile returned, but it was thinner now, brittle. He leaned back in his chair, voice dropping low. You don't belong at this table, Maddie. You never did. So let me make something clear. If you think you can hold this company hostage, I'll make sure you never work in this industry again. I don't care if you wrapped your little interference in legal paper and proxies. We will find the crack. I stood slowly. You already found it, I said. 3 days ago, in clause 4.9b. I just used it before you did. He didn't stop me as I left. But that silence? It didn't feel like surrender. It felt like warning. By 3 p.m., I received an email from HR. Subject: Internal Policy Inquiry. Immediate response required. The message was short and icy. a formal notice of an internal investigation into unauthorized engagement with corporate contracts outside the scope of assigned duties. No mention of the filing, just enough words to imply wrongdoing. They were moving fast. Good. So was I. I forwarded the email to Jenna, my lawyer, with a short note, "Here it comes." She called back within the hour. "They're going to try to make it look like policy misconduct," she said. "Not illegal, not criminal, just enough to force you out or damage your credibility." I figured. "I've drafted an official letter of counsel," she added. "If they so much as blink wrong, they'll know we're watching." By 5 p.m., the letter was sent. A formal warning that any retaliatory action would be considered workplace discrimination, legal overreach, and potential whistleblower suppression. Jenna cited relevant employment law, included a reminder of protected rights under corporate compliance statutes, and CC'd the general counsel's office. No response, not yet. The next morning, my badge didn't work. I stood at the elevator bank, scanning the card twice. Nothing. Then again. Still nothing. The receptionist gave me an awkward look and picked up the phone. "I'm sorry, Maddie. You've been marked as inactive. HR wants to see you." I didn't panic. I didn't even blink. I simply stepped back, pulled out my phone, and called Jenna. "Time to send the second letter," I said. 5 minutes later, I was in HR's glass fishbowl office. 2 reps sat across from me, trying to keep their expressions neutral. A laptop glowed between us, with my name on the screen. Suspended access. Pending review. They started reading a script, some vague lines about system compliance and policy. I held up a hand. "My counsel will be responding. Any further questions should be directed through her office." The room went quiet. I handed them a printed copy of Jenna's legal response, the one she'd sent while I was en route. It stated in no uncertain terms that any disciplinary action based on my protected legal activity would be met with swift legal recourse. It demanded reinstatement of all access pending formal mediation and served as a pre-litigation notice of employer retaliation. One of them cleared her throat. "We'll pass this on." "Good," I said. I stood, calm and slow. "Because if you're going to take a swing at me, I suggest you don't miss." They didn't say it out loud. Not yet. But the office was no longer whispering about me. Now they were whispering about him. It began as a low hum in the break room. Glances exchanged too quickly. Voices that dipped mid-sentence when doors opened. The legal team walked through the halls like ghosts. HR kept their heads down. People were jittery, double-checking calendar invites, speaking in vague shorthand no one had used before. Everyone felt it. The storm was circling, and this time, it wasn't circling me. By Thursday afternoon, Nathan's office door stayed closed. Too many private meetings. Too many conference calls with legal. He passed people in the hall without looking at them. His usual performance, the back slaps, the false warmth, the pep talk swagger, was gone, replaced by clipped steps and furrowed brows. That morning, I'd gotten back my system access. No apology, no explanation, just a quiet reactivation and a calendar notification. William S. Private meeting, 4 p.m., board conference room. William Sanderson, chairman of the board. The kind of name that never showed up in my inbox. A presence so far removed from the day-to-day that most employees only saw him in investor reports or annual addresses. But now he wanted to talk to me. Not Nathan, not legal, me. I wore navy that day. Simple, intentional. I brought nothing with me except a slim folder. Not to impress him, but to remind him I wasn't guessing. I had facts. He was already there when I arrived. Gray suit, silver cufflinks, the kind of posture that belonged to someone used to decisions with too many zeros at the end. He didn't stand when I entered, just gestured to the seat across from him. "Ms. Hart," he said. "Mr. Sanderson." He clasped his hands, leaning slightly forward. "I've been briefed. Or rather, I've been half-briefed, and that's the problem. We have a pending acquisition worth nearly $60 million, And suddenly, the legal department is circulating panicked memos about a contested filing, reputational risk, and potential internal exposure. Tell me what happened. Your version. I opened the folder. I didn't dramatize. I didn't editorialize. I presented the facts. The clause. The oversight. My direct warning during the prep meeting. Then I described how I was dismissed, not quietly, not in a closed meeting, but mocked publicly in front of the entire executive team. I didn't flinch when I said it. I even quoted Nathan's words. "You're just a secretary. Don't think for lawyers." William's brow furrowed slightly, but he said nothing. I went on. How I had recognized the loophole. How I had lawfully filed a claim through an entity I'd owned for years, using my own funds and personal counsel. How I received no acknowledgement, but instead a veiled bribe from the CEO himself, followed by retaliation disguised as policy enforcement. Then I slid one page across the table. My lawyer's formal communication to HR. The timestamp. The language. The legal precedent cited. William read the page slowly, eyes sharp but unreadable. Then he set it down with care. "You kept records." "I work in documentation. It's what I do." He nodded once, slowly, then sat back in his chair. The silence stretched for a moment, long enough for me to feel how heavy the moment really was. "We've invested a great deal into this deal," he finally said. "And if what you're telling me is accurate, and I see no reason to doubt it, then we have a more significant issue than a legal delay. We have a leadership credibility crisis." He folded his hands again. "What do you want, Ms. Hart?" That caught me off guard. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because no one had asked. "I want the truth acknowledged," I said. "I want to stop being treated like a problem to bury. I don't want hush money. I don't want a promotion. I want integrity restored. Not just for me, but for everyone here who's been dismissed for daring to be right in the wrong room." He looked at me, really looked at me, for a long moment. Then he nodded. "There will be an internal review, not HER board-led. I'll oversee it myself." He paused. "But in the meantime, we ask for your discretion. No press, no public statements." I didn't hesitate. "Fine. As long as discretion goes both ways. No more retaliatory moves, no more manipulation, no more turning legal threats into intimidation tactics." He gave the faintest smile. "You've been underestimated." "I know." He stood then, the meeting clearly over. I rose too. "Ms. Hart, I suspect this won't be the last time we speak." "Neither do I." That night, I sat on my couch, folder in my lap, watching as the lights of the city blinked in slow pulses outside my window. I had just stared down the man who signed off on 7-figure executive bonuses, and I hadn't wavered. The game had shifted again. The board was now involved. And Nathan! He was about to realize the only thing more dangerous than underestimating me was trying to erase me. The board meeting didn't feel like a board meeting. There were no pastries, no nervous interns setting out bottles of sparkling water, no polished PowerPoint decks, just a table full of sober executives, and a silence so thick you could hear the HVAC hum in the ceiling. William sat at the head of the table. Nathan, unusually quiet, sat 3 chairs down, eyes fixed straight ahead. He wasn't the Nathan we all knew. No casual smirks, no smug lean in his chair. Just stillness, like a man walking toward a verdict. They called me in after the meeting had already begun. I was told I'd have 5 minutes to explain my actions. I used 3. "I acted as a private citizen, not an employee," I began. "I identified a licensing vulnerability using publicly available language within the acquisition contract. When I raised the concern, I was publicly dismissed and personally humiliated by the CEO. I subsequently took legal steps to secure provisional rights using a dormant LLC, fully within the bounds of intellectual property law, no theatrics. Just facts, just truth." William nodded. "Did you attempt to bring this to the attention of leadership before filing?" "Yes," I replied without flinching. "I warned Mr. Maddox directly during the contract review meeting." The attention in the room shifted. All eyes turned to Nathan. He cleared his throat. She made a comment, yes, but it wasn't appropriate for her role. She's not part of legal. I didn't believe it warranted discussion. You didn't check it? One of the board members asked, her tone sharp. He faltered. I believed it was already vetted. The air turned heavier. Another board member tapped a pen against his folder. So, you ignored an internal warning and then attempted to discredit the person who made it, after she turned out to be correct? Nathan's jaw tensed. I didn't discredit her. I simply sent her to HR for a policy violation, shut down her access to internal systems, attempted a private buyout without board knowledge. Shall I go on? The room went still again. William finally spoke, voice calm but firm. This was a $58 million acquisition, and you missed a fundamental flaw because you chose ego over expertise. You then retaliated against the only person in the company who identified the risk, and, might I add, who mitigated it at her own expense. Nathan said nothing. Effective immediately, William continued, you are relieved of your duties. You will surrender all access to internal systems and may not enter the premises without legal clearance. It was over before Nathan even stood. He rose slowly, shoulders squared, like a man trying to salvage dignity from wreckage. But there was no performance left in him, just exit. He walked out without a word. 2 days later, an internal email was circulated. Nathan Maddox has officially resigned. No fanfare, no farewell cake, just 3 sterile lines and a signature from William Sanderson, newly appointed interim CEO. But later that same afternoon, I got a personal call from William's office. A simple message. He'd like to speak to you again. This time, I didn't sit across from him. He asked me to sit beside him. The board has unanimously approved the continuation of the acquisition, he said, but only under strict procedural oversight. He turned to me. I'd like you to join the negotiation team as an internal advisor. I want your eyes on every clause, every licensing condition, every line of data, and I want you to be able to speak directly, no intermediaries, no filters. It took me a second to absorb what he was offering. Authority, not in title, but in impact. I'll need formal power to audit contracts, I said, full access, and the right to flag or halt processes if I spot irregularities. You'll have it, I nodded. Then let's close the deal the right way. Over the next 3 weeks, I became something most people never expected me to be. Visible. I walked into rooms I'd previously been told I wasn't allowed in. I reviewed documents before the legal team. I flagged issues before executives even noticed them. No one questioned my presence now. No one called me just a secretary. Because under my watch, the contract was stripped of every ambiguity. Every licensing clause was rewritten, every potential loophole sealed. The client-side team, wary after rumors of internal disruption, expressed admiration for how transparent and precise our final drafts became. When the deal officially closed, it was hailed across the industry as a case study in ethical course correction. Industry blogs praised the surgical clarity of our licensing structure. An article in Corporate Ledger Weekly called it a last-minute salvage that turned into a model for responsible acquisitions. No one mentioned my name, but I didn't need them to, because I had built something bigger than recognition. I had rewritten the rules they once used to erase people like me. The building felt different now. Maybe it was the way people greeted me in the hall. Eye contact held a little longer, handshakes firmer, fewer glances that skipped over me like I was part of the furniture. Or maybe it was just me. For years, I'd walked these same corridors with my head down, polite, efficient, easy to overlook. But now they saw me. The deal had closed, flawlessly. Every clause polished, every risk neutralized, every doubt silenced not by force, but by precision. And when the final documents were signed, there was no party, no confetti, just the quiet buzz of relief. William had sent a thank you email to the entire company. My name was listed at the top of the acknowledgments, in bold. I hadn't even seen it until someone from legal forwarded it to me with 3 words: "You earned this." And then, 2 days later, I got the call. William's office again. The same conference room. The same gray light pouring through the windows. But this time, there was no tension, only calm. He didn't waste time. "I'd like to offer you something long-term," he said. "You've shown more foresight and ethical discipline than anyone else in this building, more than some of our former executives." He paused, folding his hands. "I'd like you to step into a new role, Director of Risk and Contract Strategy. You'll report directly to the board. No layers, no red tape. Your job will be simple: identify cracks before they widen. Help us prevent what almost happened with the Maddox deal. And, when necessary, tell the truth no one wants to hear." He looked at me squarely. "I need someone in this company who doesn't act out of self-interest. Someone who cares more about the right outcome than the profitable one. And I believe that's you." I sat still for a moment. Not because I was surprised, but because I understood exactly what this moment meant. It wasn't about power. Not for me. It was about voice. And this time, they weren't just letting me speak. They were asking me to. "I'll accept," I said. He nodded once, satisfied. And just like that, the title changed. But more importantly, the weight behind my words changed. The silence I had once drowned in had become an echo chamber, not just for me, but for others who'd been overlooked. The new office wasn't lavish, but it was mine. A floor higher. A glass door with my name printed clearly. Maddie Hart, Director, Risk, and Contract Strategy. The desk was larger, the shelves empty, waiting for me to fill them, not with decorations, but with decisions. I took down the old floral planner from my previous desk and set it beside my keyboard. Not out of habit, but as a reminder of where I'd started. And as I sat there that first morning, with a fresh mug of coffee and the city skyline winking through the windows, I thought about everything I'd endured to get here. 8 years of being the note-taker, the coffee fetcher, the one they called a good girl behind closed doors, the one who noticed things, but wasn't allowed to say them, who pointed out cracks and was told to stop thinking above her pay grade. Now it was my job to look for cracks. This was my victory, not the title, not the view, but the knowledge that the next person who raised her hand in a meeting with an unpopular truth or a quiet insight wouldn't be laughed at or sent to HR. Because she wouldn't be alone, because someone like me would be watching and listening, and this time, no one would be erased.